Hello and welcome to Not to Get Political, the podcast where we delve into the world of politics and hope to remain unscathed. Climate change is the biggest threat facing the Earth and all of its inhabitants. Despite acknowledgement from governments, little action has been taken to address the impending disaster. And if you think I sound biased, well then why don't you go to Hawaii? As a result, climate change activist groups around the world have taken to the streets to raise awareness and call on their respective governments to not shirk their responsibilities. Joining me today is Teddy Ogborn from Planet Over Profit, Pot for Climate, a US-based climate change group who you might have seen on socials in the Hamptons and elsewhere. Teddy, thank you so much for coming on.
Harry, super appreciate it. Excited to be on the show.
What's your mission statement? How did you guys get involved in climate change awareness?
Yeah, Planet Over Profit or POP, we're a youth-led climate justice group building people power, mass mobilization to take nonviolent direct action against the fossil fuel industry and put planet over profit. The demand's right there in the name. It's very simple because essentially our entire socioeconomic structure is based upon the idea that snuffing out people's lives is a worthy exchange for adding more zeros to a few people's bank accounts. And that cannot fly. It can't fly anymore. It should have never been acceptable. And especially now when, life on this planet and especially human survivability on this planet is imperiled in the short term, we need to be addressing these things immediately. And so because we see also the inequality crises facing people across the world as paramount. In fact, in my view, the Venn diagram of the climate crisis and inequality crises is basically a circle. I think that our mobilizing strategies around both of these issues, especially for mass mobilization, is really, really key in winning this thing.
So I guess that's why you guys are in the Hamptons at the moment. Can you talk us through that? I'm sure everyone listening has probably seen you guys on TikTok and Instagram in these very nice restaurants in the Hamptons, causing all manner of a ruckus, I guess we could say. So talk us through that. What's the thought process behind that?
Yeah, of course. So listeners who maybe aren't aware, the Hamptons are one of the most wealth-centric places in the entire United States, especially folks who are billionaires in New York City will summer there in the Hamptons. And the Hamptons, have grown more and more expensive. Tons of fossil fuel CEOs, politicians, execs, the bad of the bad. That's where they go to treat the land as their playground, which is extremely appalling, given that it sits on the Shinnecock Nation. That's the indigenous nation that has always lived from time immemorial on there on Long Island. And they continue to encroach on that land, disrespect, even cause racist attacks on the Shinnecock folks. And so what better place to target for a group like ours that are, white rich people in the Hamptons continue to denigrate the importance of indigenous land defenders who have always known how to take care of the land, how to take and give back what it needs, and also where the people that are for business and for pleasure destroying our planet, that's where they go to think that they're safe and think that they have a haven. And following them there, telling them that's not the case, and sharing that message with the world is absolutely crucial. And we found that really resonated with people. I mean, a lot of people might know us from those Hamptons actions. We went pretty viral, which is kind of funny. A lot of that was through TikTok, and it was a last minute decision. We thought maybe people would want to see this. We made a TikTok account basically the night before we ran into this gala at the Parrish Art Museum there, which was sponsored by Bank of America. I think the number 4 or definitely a top 5 fossil funder. And it really took off. People really resonated with it. People want to see direct action, as in directly confronting the people that are destroying our planet. And when I say for business and for pleasure, I mean, it can't be more true. A lot of these people, their investments are in fossil fuels. That's what keeps it alive. That's what keeps the industry alive, despite all the science and math that we know. Or they're directly fossil fuel executives. The pleasure part of it, the top 10% of wealth owners on the planet are responsible for 50% of lifestyle emissions on this planet. That, of course, includes flying on private jets, which is one of the most egregious things you can do in terms of luxury emissions. And of course, while we were in the Hamptons, we also blockaded a private airport, the private airport that gets folks into East Hampton. And we did all these things in partnership with New York Communities for Change. Now, this is a long-running grassroots BIPOC-led really successful nonprofit based in New York that has been operating for years on such campaigns. In fact, we joined them last year in the Hamptons under a different name, which was really successful.
Can you
And
talk us
so,
more through that
yeah,
campaign? Sorry, what was that? So that campaign that you did last year, what was that regarding?
yeah, it was a very similar campaign, again in consultation with the Shinnecock Nation. We blockaded the airport again, but I think this time around we really kind of concretized our demands and our ethos around confronting billionaires directly, and that's where you kind of get these videos where we're going into
So
restaurants.
what
We're going
are
straight to
your
businesses.
sorry? So what are your demands? What are we calling for?
Yeah, so we kind of think of it as a bit of a trident. So end fossil fuel infrastructure, end fossil fuel finance, and redistribute wealth, right? We don't see an end to the catastrophes that we're facing until we can effectively accomplish all three of these things. And the third one really undergirds the first two. I mean, fossil finance will continue as long as it's profitable for billionaires to profit off of folks' death and demise and continued colonization, right? And of course, the fossil fuel infrastructure ties into those frontline fights. We just supported on media with Appalachians against pipelines at the Mountain Valley Pipeline, for instance, which is recently on our socials.
And so that redistribution of wealth, where is that money going to be going to?
Oh my gosh. I mean, first,
Can you give? Sorry, wait. Just before we go any further, could you give us a estimate of how much money we're talking about in terms of the wealth?
we've never had a greater wealth inequality gap than we do now, right? And that's because, especially over the course of the pandemic, you see trillions of dollars leaving the hands of lower income, middle class folks. And of course, that's where we saw those news stories of record wealth for Bezos, for Musk. I think now Bernard Arnault is the richest man in the world. Um, and that's a trend that will simply continue. And all of that money in individuals' hands, it's resting there idle, or it's being put towards trips and faulty suds to the Titanic or to space. And all of the, I mean, I just tell people, imagine what we could do with those trillions of dollars in wealth if they were put towards things like education, housing, climate solutions. The phrase that goes around in my head all the time is there is enough, right? The idea of scarcity, it's manufactured, and it's capitalist propaganda, frankly.
Yeah.
There is enough. We have the technology, we have the funds to save billions of lives, literally, no exaggeration. And if it's going to be continue to be allocated for some folks' private jets and their lifestyles at the expense of the many, then we're going to see some real crises in the coming years.
You mentioned earlier that there were racist attacks being committed towards the indigenous people on these lands. What kind of attacks are we talking about?
Yeah. So just a couple of weeks actually before we came out there to the Shinnecock Nation, they had, I believe it's an annual ceremony where some members of the nation paddle down a canal or a tributary there in a canoe, and that's very sacred to them. The water, of course, is very sacred to these coastal people. And white Hamptonites in a speedboat intentionally drove too close on the water to them, creating a huge wake, capsizing the canoe.
Oh wow!
You see continued instances. For example, a video went pretty viral after we had left of a Shinnecock woman confronting a man who was on their portion of the beach, and telling him, "You're not meant to be here." And he's staying put. He's saying, like, "Leave me alone." But it's their nation, right? It's been their land literally for tens of thousands of years. And so things like that continue to happen. And of course, white Hamptonites continue to attempt to regulate what Shinnecock Nation members are able to do with their land, and such things.
So you're talking about these people, and I'll be honest, this is the first time I've ever heard of this group. Do you think that it's trying to raise their profile that could help to draw awareness? People would just kind of look at them and dismiss them, not thinking that they are indigenous to the land there?
I think certainly in the Hamptons, folks are very aware of that dynamic. I do think, right, exactly. You knowing of the Hamptons and not knowing that it sits on tribal land where it's still occupied incredibly beautifully by indigenous folks. I think that speaks to the fact that, yeah, people know the Hamptons for the wealth, for the huge houses and the vacationing in the summer, and they don't know that there's active resistance by indigenous folks there. And to that end, on kind of a macro level, part of our organizing structure, and as we spread, we can't insist enough how important it is to be partnering or at least working in consultation with groups on the front lines, with indigenous groups, because as I've said, they've always known how to take and give back to the land what is needed, and of course, the kind of capitalism that we're talking about is rooted in centuries of incredibly racist, genocidal colonization, and these acts of resistance need to be cherished, upheld, amplified, etc.
So a video I saw of one of your protests recently was on a building site, and you're sort of disrupting the builders working there. Your mission statement says that you are going after the 1%. Are builders in that group?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So what we partnered with Appalachians Against Pipelines. This is a group that has been resisting the Mountain Valley Pipeline for over 5 years now, actively resisting on those sites. To respond directly, those builders, they get paid for breaks. So it's not as though we're disrupting, their flow of money. In fact, we've extended, again, the building of that project, or I should say Appalachians Against Pipeline, with the partnership of groups that want to help out, like ours, in this instance, have extended the length of the building of that project for over 5 years now, estimated $4 billion. It's more than doubled its budget. And so, there's always disrupting the system that we're in always comes with such complications. But in this specific instance, right, these are workers that are getting paid for those breaks. And anecdotally, they seem to be kind of having a good time, just chatting away and having a water break with their friends while we're there, or while folks are there.
Whilst you're there and you're causing these disruptions, do you speak to the workers that are there and explain why you're doing what you're doing, and how do they respond to you?
Yeah. Oftentimes, Appalachians Against Pipelines will engage with workers who have questions for them. Oftentimes they do engage in really good faith, right? I think they are aware of, the climate crisis, of course, which is the thing. No matter who you are, there's immediate physical evidence now, wherever you are on the planet, of what this crisis is doing. The floods that we're seeing in Vermont, China, the wildfires, smoke that was pouring through the Northeast most recently, the wildfires just the other day, we're still counting the bodies, the lives lost in Maui. And so it is undeniable, and people tend to understand that, right? And of course, we understand that these are folks that are doing their job.
So I guess my next question is to you. You've mentioned all these examples where climate change is so prevalent. Why do people still deny it?
Money.
Money.
Right. I mean, it is incredible. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, for example, we know that this project has been delayed to such a degree where, when you listen in on those investor calls, they're simply saying, we hope we break even on this thing. And that's because of resistance, right? They're not even expecting to run it at full capacity at this point, because it was never going, the demand was never there. But private interests, and then let's name them, the billionaires that are actually profiting directly off of these projects, right? They are completely insulated from all the things that we're talking about, from widespread hunger, housing issues, especially in New York City. I mean, that gap is insane. And so as long as it remains profitable, and as long as wealth equals power in the government, I mean, in many ways, we're an oligarchy here in the US, and I know that's true in many ways there in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Sunak, I mean, we can get into it. But
yeah, we can definitely look into that one.
Living in the North Sea, I mean, I can't believe it. I want to go there myself. So yeah, because wealth can equal power, and billionaires are profiting, that's why these things continue to be built despite our best science.
So, but this is the thing with your current government, with Joe Biden as your president. Though, I mean, he's a weird one to a certain extent, because he strikes me as someone who seems to acknowledge that there are these big crises going on and they need to be addressed, but it just seems like he's just putting out tweets, or his team are putting out tweets, and no action is actually being taken. Why does it feel like that? And if it is the case, why is it the case?
He said what he had to say to get elected, but I mean, he is at this point, his actions are speaking louder than words, and he's behaving like a climate change denier, right? His administration has so many powers that it could unleash, either by announcing a climate emergency or simply not approving fossil fuels at this rate. The Biden administration is approving the Biden administration is approving fossil fuels at a rate faster than President Trump did, right? Which is insane. And of course, they pay lip service to, wildfires, smoke, and lives lost in Hawaii, all of these disasters. And they say, we're working hard on this. And they don't show it. They are truly not doing these things. Just the other day, a friend of mine in another group disrupted our vice president, Kamala Harris, at an event, asking her about the deaths in Hawaii, asking her about their approval of fossil fuels. She laughed at him and had security rip him from the room, right? That's what this administration does. So as he's gearing up for a re-election, I mean, we have to push this guy and say, listen, you're not going to get the young people's votes, especially if you're not going to act in a real way on climate.
Yeah, because I think the last election, 2020, it was the anti-Trump vote that sort of won it for him. And yet, I guess this time around, though, it's looking like Trump will be the Republican candidate. Though, I mean, I guess we'll see, given the situation in Georgia and in other states with the indictments that he's facing. Do you think, with the next election looming, depending on who gets elected, do you think that will have an impact on the climate?
Absolutely. I mean, in very real, non-exaggerative terms, the fate of the world hangs in the balance. So it sounds dramatic, but it's hardly an exaggeration that the fate of the world, the fate of human society, does rely in many ways on what the U.S. president does, and so in many ways it does hinge on the next election, right? So we see Republicans already drafting this plan. I think they call it like Project 2025 or something, about how they are going to undo all of the climate policies that Biden has managed to push through and approve more and more fossil fuels, right? But also, we've been, confronted many times. I personally have, by folks that saying like, "Well, do you want Trump to win? Why are you critiquing Biden?" And of course, we have a fucked up electoral system here in the U.S. where we have bad or worse options for climate, especially. But when people say that to me, it's like, you're only saying that because the bar is so goddamn low, right? And one of the demands, at least that I like to bring to the forefront, is we need a climate president. We need a climate president. Now, that could be Joe Biden if he gets his shit figured out and actually starts acting with the reality of the moment. It could, and I wish it was, another candidate that from the get-go has demonstrated very real commitment to ending fossil fuels. I mean, the IPCC has shown us that is the only scientifically proven way that we can maintain a healthy habitat for humans and all life on this planet. We have to end fossil fuels yesterday.
And which candidate do you think that could be?
I can't speak on behalf of POP as an org. We don't do any kind of endorsements. I think it's very interesting to see what has happened for primary candidates or powerful people in office who do seem to mean what they say on climate. So just the state of things right now is we do have someone running on the Democratic ticket named Marianne Williamson, and she, is in many ways it would be a huge long shot for her to be nominated. In fact, the Democratic National Committee is not even allowing debates for the primary. Everybody is just getting behind Joe Biden.
Oh, wow.
Immediately. Yeah. Bernie Sanders even endorsed him basically as soon as he announced he was running for 2024. Right. And so things are really broken in that way. But if you look at Marianne Williamson's messaging, it's just an example. But she's saying day one, I would cancel the Willow Project, which is a massive, massive new oil extraction project that the Biden administration pushed through in northern Alaska. And she's saying she would cancel it day one. And I frankly believe that because she recognizes the stakes of the moment, and she often partners with frontline and notable climate activists like Stephen Donziger and such.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're saying about these new projects that are being sort of unveiled, In the UK, for example, as you mentioned earlier, hundreds of new oil and gas licenses being issued in the North Sea. In the Conservatives' press statement for announcing hundreds of new oil and gas licenses, they named Just Stop Oil directly, saying that they weren't giving in to their demands, because obviously their big demand is to end the issuing of new oil and gas licenses. And the Tories go, huh? No, and they issue hundreds more. Do you think that your activism will have a similar effect?
You mean a similar effect in terms of like essentially retaliation from our conservatives?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess sort of on a state level, maybe on a state and federal level. Do you think that governments will look at what you're doing and go, "Oh, okay, well, we're going to carry on doing this because you've just showing us how much money we're making from this. We should be doing this more."
Yeah, I think what you're touching on is the fact. So, right, you have a Tory in office now, and right now Joe Biden, a supposed Democrat, right, is our president, and a lot of what we do that surprises people is targeting Democrats, right? Because a lot of them are in power, and a lot of them are very vulnerable to rhetoric which exposes their hypocrisy, which exposes the fact that they say one thing and do another, which is called lying. Right. And so now is a really prime time for doing that. I mean, when a Republican's in office, that's low-hanging fruit, and they're not going to listen to you. But if you can threaten someone's essentially re-election and tell them that young people will not come out for them and vote for them because they are continuing to fuck them over on climate, I think that is a really unique opportunity to do that. I mean, we have that here in New York City. We have a very conservative but Democrat mayor, Eric Adams, right? And this guy is a cop and a landlord, but he was elected on the Democratic ticket, right? And we have a local law that he's soon going to either decide to completely gut or to uphold on climate and gas and new buildings, right? And so those people are very vulnerable in that way. And again, you know, a lot of our tactics go straight to we know that the people in power are seeing them, both because the billionaires see us in the Hamptons, our videos are going viral, and like I mentioned, like one of my friends who just confronted the vice president the other day. I mean, she knows exactly who we are, what our demands are, and how we're exposing them. So we hope to see reactions on that soon. It continues to escalate, and escalation is the only way forward.
So I guess that brings me on to my next question. How far is too far when it comes to protesting against climate change?
Yeah, well, you'll get a lot of different responses from different people when asked that, but here's my evaluation. Right now, the tactics that we're using are deemed radical, right? They're very controversial in many ways, as I know Just Stop Oil is in the UK. And what that tells us is that we're in kind of a sweet spot in shifting the Overton window, which is a phrase that just refers to the acceptable terms of debate, right? So as people see more of our videos, people realize that folks in office aren't doing anything, and that people like me who don't have power until I'm putting my body in front of something or organizing people are actually taking action. They see that as a potential solution or as something they want to get involved in, right? So disrupting billionaires, disrupting politicians, taking risks, even legal risks, right? People get arrested for putting their bodies in front of bulldozers, in front of airplanes, in front of very, very powerful politicians, right? So that tells me that right now we're in a good spot. But moving ahead, I mean, many things that people have chosen to do in the environmental movement for decades, they are acts of survival. When you corner an animal, it will do what it needs to survive. It doesn't lay down, right? And this is really nice because rhetorically I can just kick it over to a fictional thing. But if you've known about the movie How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is loosely based on the theory book by Andreas Malm, highly recommend that book and the film to any listeners. This is a group of people that plot to blow up a pipeline in Texas for different reasons, as an act of survival, as an act of self-defense. And you recently, actually just today, I believe it was, in Montana, a group of youths won a case in the state judiciary, which states that continued state support of fossil fuels threatens their constitutional right to a healthful environment. I mean, this is huge news. It sets an amazing precedent for the youth movement, but for the climate movement broadly in the US and hopefully globally, right? And so as the crisis escalates, as it continues to affect more and more people, I mean, people will take bigger and bigger escalated action to survive. we hope it stops now before folks have to escalate, before folks are acting out of immediate needs to survival, but many folks already are. And so we think right now we're in a sweet spot with how radical we're being.
It's interesting that you mentioned legislation, because in the UK, when groups like JSO have been protesting against climate change, the Conservatives implemented legislation known as the Public Order Act, which basically clamped down on the right to protest, made it hard for people to protest, and they blamed Just Stop Oil for the reason that they had to take those measures. So it's quite interesting that over in the US, you've got places like Montana, which are listening to people and going, okay, all right, we need to do something here. Whereas here in the UK, it's like, okay, right, that's it. You're no longer protesting anymore. People are still continuing, and they're breaking the rules. But it is kind of a scary point, and especially seeing people who I suppose would identify as being progressive and left wing sort of buying into the idea that JSO are the reason that protest rights in this country are being infringed on. Do you guys support JSO?
Certainly. I mean, these are movement sisters. What JSO is doing, I mean, back in October when they had, I think, daily sits on the road, I mean, that was incredible, and also huge props to their media team. I mean, that rippled out and inspired activists the world over, especially folks like myself, right, who are now thinking about how can we have a similar kind of notoriety. So of course we do, right? I mean, our tactics right now are somewhat different, but the demands end fossil fuels right now, right? End fossil fuels, just stop oil.
So just to confirm, Just Stop Oil is what inspired you to take the action that you're taking now?
They're not the sole inspiration. I mean, what we've been doing has been percolating for a little over a year. But of course, we are we're very much inspired into action by seeing folks have successful campaigns like JSO has had multiple times in the last year.
Just so people kind of know, I don't know how big our audience is over in the US, but how do people go about joining your movement?
Yeah, the link is in our social media bios. Pot for Climate is our handle across all platforms, and you can sign up right there, and we'll get in touch. We are welcoming folks from across my country and across the world to get in touch. We need people mobilizing the world over, right? When I first got involved in the climate movement, I had to get over some imposter syndrome, right? I didn't study climate or political science. I didn't have a background of political consciousness really until I met the people that I'm working with. But once you realize that this movement just needs people, it needs people to be successful. And if you have any kind of spare time, or you have a skill that you know this movement might need, I mean, I really encourage you to either fill out our form or wherever you are locally. I mean, it needs people. We need to mass mobilize to win this thing. It can't be the same 15 people every time.
It's interesting that you mentioned like bringing on people, because here in the UK, the thing you hear the most about groups like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain is I would support them if they weren't inconveniencing the general public, if they weren't doing these sit-ins in the roads or the slow walks. They should be going after the people that actually have the power to make those changes. Are you guys hearing a similar thing over in the US?
Well, as I think we chatted a bit about earlier, right now our tactics are very focused on the people that directly cause this crisis. And so those are the billionaires that are doing it with their luxury missions or their business dealings, politicians, folks that when we're in the camera frame with them, it's very clear the dynamic that's going on. But that's not to say that I condemn actions that do disrupt the public. In some cases, that's necessary to wake folks up to what's going on. And it is incredibly controversial to do that, to do road blockades, for instance, and you don't know who you're trapping behind their wheel, making them angry. But I understand it as a tactic for sure, and I applaud Just Stop Oil for really committing and making themselves known via that.
I will just say to the people in the comments who are commenting about ambulance and everything, these groups have a blue lights policy. So is there anything that you think that Just Stop Oil have done badly that you think is focusing too much on the public and not enough on politicians?
Right. Well, I think it's interesting that, where they get a lot of their attention is, and their messaging out there is from these road blockades, right? But when they try other tactics, they are ignored, right? They've done things that are either less disruptive to the general public, or simply for the sake of going incredibly viral. I mean, the soup on the painting, mwah, chef's kiss, right? And that's inspired things throughout the globe, and people are really talking about it now. Again, controversial, but that's not blocking however many people on a road. And so, it's not as though Just Stop Oil isn't trying these other tactics, isn't trying things that are more targeted. It's that they're saying, look, what do you want from us? We are trying to get you to see the truth of the moment in any way that we can, right? And in that sense, I really empathize and understand it.
What do you think because one of the things we always see when you see the roadblocks in the UK is, oh, you wouldn't be able to do that in America. What do you think would happen if your groups like yours did what Just Stop Oil are doing in the US?
Look, our group itself hasn't done it before, but I've certainly been a part of road blockades in New York City and other places. It happens, right? Folks have differing opinions on engaging in those road blockades. I, for one, right now, it's not my tactic of choice when I'm considering things, especially because New York City is a very target-rich environment. You can go directly to the apartment building of billionaires who are, run private equity firms that are investing massively in fossil fuels and extraction in indigenous lands. You can go straight to where they live and protest outside and block that building, and I've done that as well. So it's certainly possible as a tactic. People continue to do it. Planet Over Profit right now isn't using that tactic, but I wouldn't count it out. But we do feel very confident that right now that our tactic of targeting people that are directly responsible in a way that we know ripples very far on social media and legacy media, we feel very confident in that.
You're seeing all these climate crises in the US, the wildfires in Maui, as you mentioned, floods in Vermont. When do you think people will start taking climate change seriously?
I mean, I think many people already do, in that we are in kind of this strange gray zone where denialists have turned into delayists, and they can't deny the things that they see around them. But oftentimes, the people in power are incredibly insulated already from the crisis, from the crises. Right? Again, we're working at the intersection of the inequality crisis and the climate crisis, which is a circle of a Venn diagram. And so we are offering the world, in some sense, a chance to take it seriously before it comes for them, right? To end it before it ends them. And I know that sounds very doomer and scary, but especially for folks in our generation, right? Oh, sorry. I'm 25. I want to maybe have a family someday, right? Maybe in the next decade. I don't know if that's a safe thing to do. I don't know if I can do that with a good conscience. So that's why I do what I do. And I think as we find new creative ways to really get the message out there, to show the stakes of the moment and the risks we're willing to take to stop this thing, I think people will really wake up to it. And also just the sheer mass of people getting involved, right? That's why we need to mass mobilize, and it can't be me with that sign alone in the street. It's got to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people. So if you do have US listeners, or actually if people want to come from across the pond, we do have people coming internationally for this. September 17th is a massive climate mobilization here in New York City. It's the beginning of the UN Climate Ambition Summit. So the UN Attorney General, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is actually a great ally of the movement. He continually says the facts about the crisis and the stakes of the moment. And he has said for the Climate Ambition Summit at the UN in New York that if you're a world leader that is not taking real steps on climate, do not come, right? And he's saying that very knowingly because he's coming to New York City, right? This is Biden's territory, a guy that is, again, approving fossil fuels faster than Trump. So we are doing an insane mass mobilization. I've been on so many wonderful calls with the organizers from across the country, folks with connections across the global South, frontline leaders that will be coming to New York City to make themselves heard. And so we invite folks to come across, come say hi in New York. I'll be there for sure. And it's going to be a really powerful moment, as well accompanied by, it's going to be a massive march, massive mobilizing moment, as well as folks taking direct action together, hundreds, if not thousands of people. So I really encourage people to join or just follow along on social media. It should be big.
Teddy, thank you so much for coming on. You're our first American guest, and you've definitely set the standard. I really appreciate that. Is there anything that you would like to promote before you go?
Yeah, I'll just, it's worth repeating. If folks want to get in touch, Pop for Climate with the number 4, that's our social media handles across platforms. The link in those bios, you can sign up to get put in touch with us, even if you are someone that wants to do another interview with us, right? And then planetoverprofit.us, that's our website, pretty direct as well. Um, and and I just can't stress it enough, whether it's with us, whether it's with your local climate group, or you want to start something that's affiliated but not under our name. Like, I just want to fucking stop climate change. I want people to survive the next 10, 15, 20 years, but it is that soon. And so I encourage everybody to just get in touch or think about, if you do have issues with the movement now, how can you contribute? How can you make it more effective? Because we need everybody out there, or, human society as we know it will begin to collapse.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for engaging. And yeah, we'll see you for the next episode.